Welcome to Vision to Value, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how technology is planned, purchased, and implemented in state government health and human services agencies. Each episode explores the real challenges of transformation, from procurement pitfalls to leadership strategies, and provides bold insights to drive meaningful change. Your hosts, Carol Hussey and Tony Matthews, bring decades of experience from both public and private sector leadership. Together, Carol and Tony bring unfiltered insights and straight talk on what works, what doesn't, and how agencies and vendors can turn vision into real value. Now let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Vision to Value, the podcast where we look behind the curtain at modernization in state and local government programs, particularly health and human services. But a lot of what we talk about here would apply all across state and local government. So today we're kind of building upon a couple of previous podcast episodes that we had where we had our guest Paul Epp come in and we talked about a lot of things that AI related. So we did a little bit of an AI primer, and then we talked the previous episode about what could you do today? How do you get started? Most of these tools are free. They can be used to help your workforce. It doesn't have to be just the massive, multi-year system development engagements, although you'll probably have those as well. And so today what we thought we'd do is kind of just piggyback on those two previous episodes and talk about how to really start to build an AI centric program in health and human services. It's going to just keep growing. It's going to get better. And so we kind of want to introduce the idea today of a maturity model, how you can begin to take those first couple steps, knowing that you're going to advance over time, you're going to grow, your skills are going to get better, the tools are going to get better, all of that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Tony Matthews, my co-host, he's got a lot of previous insights as a leader, but also as someone that's worked in the private sector as well. So we'll talk today. We're going to give you lots of really great advice. Let's talk a little bit to start with about quick wins. We talk about that a lot, Tony, but in terms of, taking those first steps as a leader in an organization with a very new technology, which in some ways could be viewed as high risk, how would you, embark upon something like this where you want to approach this because you see the big opportunity, the potential value, and you want to begin to take those first steps? How would you do that?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the things you need to do to get AI sort of up and running, well, are things that you probably should be doing anyway. Whether it's having clean data, whether it's making sure you've got good governance, right? Whether you're making sure you've got sort of consistent formats across programs. That's all stuff that we would sort of up to now have been sort of good to haves, but not necessarily must haves. And it's always challenging getting programs to sort of coordinate, having their information, no duplicates, right? Using the same formats. It's like wrestling somebody's baby away from them. Nobody wants to change their format. And so I
Yeah.
think a lot of the things that you need to do as a primer for AI are probably things that you should be doing anyway, just as a matter
Mm-hmm.
of good practice that we don't. Let's be honest, like, you've always got some other fire that's more important than having consistent formats across programs,
Yeah.
right? But I think we're getting to that day and age where it's not AI is becoming less of a sort of, nice to have. And I think, as technology grows exponentially, it's becoming more and more of a must have.
Yeah.
And I think the folks that aren't thinking about these basic building blocks that you need to have squared away in order to have good AI are going to be behind the eight ball trying to catch up with everybody who's being proactive about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is definitely, the data readiness and governance and all that, which we're going to talk a lot about today, is, a fundamental prerequisite for really leveraging the capabilities that AI can bring to your organization and to really accelerate your organizational excellence. And, with everything happening now at the federal level, compliance, timeliness, reporting, oversight and KPIs, all of that stuff, you need to have this all in place anyway. But AI is also going to help you to really be able to respond to those changing policies and regulations, and also the business processes that are going to need to change in order for you to meet some of those, changing dynamics in our environment. Um, so let's kind of get into this data readiness piece and even the governance piece. And I think traditionally in a lot of agencies, program leaders have said that's a data thing that belongs in the IT department.
That's right.
I would disagree with that on a number of levels, but as a former leader in an agency, Tony, what was your take on that, and has that changed over time?
I like to think it's changed over time, but no, I think we insulate ourselves, right? I mean, if I'm over the SNAP program, I'm worried about the SNAP program. I'm worried about doing more with less. Federal funding is being reduced. I don't really have the bandwidth or the inclination to sort of do anything proactively. I'm trying to keep the lights on. I'm trying to get payments out. I'm trying to make sure eligibility is clean. I'm trying to make sure we're responding timely to appeals. I've got staff issues. I got people working from home. Some are probably working more than others. I'm having to figure out how to monitor, productivity. So, when you come to me and say, hey, we really need you to work with the TANF program or childcare to make sure that, your formats are consistent. um, yeah, okay, I'll put that on the list. So I think if you don't, and we talked early when we started this podcast about the importance of leadership and making sure that somebody that sees the big picture is explaining the why to everybody and is making sure everybody's sort of pulling in the same direction. I think that's what this comes down to. If you don't have sort of leadership that sees the value in working collectively toward sort of again, some folks are worried about the potholes that are, 100 feet in front of us. Leadership is expected to look for the bridge, to make sure the bridge isn't out 10 miles down the road. And I think this falls into that category. You can't be so worried about the potholes that you're not factoring in that the bridge may or may not be out. And
Yeah,
so I do think there's still an insulated, I'm treading water here, just trying to keep my head above water with my program. I can't be worried about everybody else's program and making sure we're on the same page with
right.
AI. Yep.
Well, and a lot of state agencies have hired, chief data officers in recent years who are sort of in charge of that. So maybe it's not the director or the commissioner or the secretary who's focusing on the data, but they know it's important, right? We know that we think about where the point of origination with data is something I go back to all the time. And so the sooner you can get from that point of origination into your system, it helps with all those things that you just talked about, right? Eligibility. I mean, think about SNAP error rates, and right now, how incredibly important that is relative to the funding that your state is going to get. And SNAP error rates may have a lot to do with data quality, data timeliness, all of those things. And so suddenly, data should be rising on your priority list. You might not, data may not be it's more of the root cause than the symptom in some cases. And so it is definitely directly related and should be of the highest level of importance. And when we talk about data governance, making that an IT function as opposed to a business function or a collaborative function would be very short-sighted, because your program people know that data. And in working around the country, I can tell you that some of these old legacy systems, people will use empty data fields for all kinds of things, just in terms of practice. That might not have been the original intention of that particular field, but now we've decided, we're going to put some other piece of data in there because we need to collect it, but we don't have another spot for it. And so, you got to get your data house in order to really begin to even think about how we're going to use AI. And so this becomes of a super high priority. We're also seeing some states, I've noticed recently, hiring chief AI officers, which I'm sure they're going to take up this fight as well, because they've got
Sure.
to have data.
It's funny you talked about using empty fields. I forget what the issue was. We're having some problem with our data. And at the end of the day, it was the program team was using a capital F for one thing and a lowercase f for something else. And, we knew that the letter meant something, but we didn't realize there was a distinction between a capital F and a lowercase
Mm,
f.
yeah, that's crazy.
By the way, hey, let's put a pin in the snap error rate. Let's make a note. We could do a whole episode on snap error rate. Let's come back to that in a future episode.
So, in preparation for our episode today, we always kind of go out, do some homework, look at recent articles and things like that. And one of the things that just popped up yesterday was this incredible article from Code for America. And it was all about getting your data ready for AI. And we wanted to give credit where credit is due to Jennifer Tom and Anne-Marie Brinza on this article. Very tactical, real advice. And also, the one thing I really want to highlight is they note that doesn't have to be a monumental effort, doesn't have to take a long time. A mantra that I've been hitting on for a long time is that, data cleanliness is not a project. It should be a lifestyle, right? This is something you should be always working on, and it's always going to have some room for improvement. So you're not going to get it done and then it's going to be perfect. But this article had some great information. I shared it with Tony yesterday, and I know you thought as well that it was really good.
Yeah, I mean, when we prep for these podcasts, we want to make sure we're doing best practices. It's not just our own perspective, but we're looking at what's going on nationally. And when you found this and sent it to me, I'm like, this is the most concise, practical, easy read to sort of, the ABCs of getting your data ready for AI. And somebody's already done all the legwork, so I'm glad that we were able to give them some props today, because it's a very concise article about what you need to do for AI. And I think, to your point, these are things that we should be doing anyway. So, it's sort of a reminder to sort of, have good housekeeping.
Yeah. And one of the other things we talked about too, in terms of data readiness, we talked about having a governance program. You need to have your IT, your program people, perhaps even other stakeholders involved in that. But one of the things you mentioned too is, creating a data inventory. Like what are all the data sets that you have, and also that are available to you? Because we're going to talk in a minute about data sharing and collaboration. But when you think about the universe of data that's available to you, some of it's in your control and some of it's not.
Right.
Some of it's accessible, some of it's not. And that's where we get into standards and kinds of a lot of other things that are important. But the beauty of AI, one of the many beauties of AI, is that we can more expeditiously clean up. We can more expeditiously map things. We can more quickly create APIs to other data sources. But the one thing you need to think about when you're getting ready for AI is not only what data do I have or need or want, but what am I going to do with that data? Because that's the other thing is, even within your own organizational silos, you have a wealth of data. Some of it you've had for decades and you may not even need or want or use anymore. So being conscious about what you need and what you don't need, and then how are you going to use it, is another sort of key function of that readiness and preparation activity.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think the other thing we need to be realistic about is, as you go through the process, let's just say of collecting the different data fields and different programs and trying to standardize those, you're going to run into projects that just materialize. Like, we realized, people had to, demonstrate their eligibility, 5 different ways for 5 different programs. And why do we have them fill out one form, right, online that's got the 20 pieces of information everybody needs? And then for the individual programs, right, the 1 or 2 that might be different, you're going to run into that just in the process of collecting. Like, wow, we've got 4 different fields for address. And so I would caution that it's easy to say, yeah, you should do an inventory, see what's not consistent, and sort of clean that up. But just know it's going to be very easy to go down a rabbit hole and want to sort of fix some things before you finish the process of the inventory and the standardization of format.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Yeah.
to be disciplined. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, that happens to me, doing house projects, right? You're starting down a path and the next thing you know, you're like remodeling your whole bathroom.
It's the
But
same thing. Yeah.
That's true. And the interesting thing about like really putting some effort into a data readiness and a data cleanup effort, it's going to inform those kinds of changes, like you just mentioned, Tony, but also even business process changes, or inform requirements for a technology modernization. You learn so much about your organization when you're doing a data cleanup, that it really can, inform a lot of great things. So inventory those things as you're going too. Like keep a running list. Oh, we learned this. How do we fix that? So it is a very insightful process for sure.
And
Um,
Carol, I just want to be clear as far as level setting expectations. I think you made a good point. It's not a project with AI that, you're done and then you don't have to revisit it. It really is sort of an ongoing sort of, you have to sort of standardize this into your daily processes, making sure the data is clean and there's not duplicates and all that stuff. But also, once you sort of have stood up AI and you feel like you're working well and it's doing what you expected it to do, there's still a human touch that has to be maintained constantly to make sure there's not a bug in the system, that there's not a new data point that messed up something else down the road. So I want to be clear that while you can sort of build this and put in the legwork to make AI work as it's designed, that doesn't mean that once it's working optimally, you don't have to have a human being maintaining that and monitoring that and being aware of what else is changing. So
mm,
I just think from an expectation standpoint, don't think you can just devote resources for a year or two, stand it up, and then it's regulating. It should
yeah.
never be self-regulating.
I really appreciate that you brought that up, Tony, because we often talk about human in the loop for AI decision making. So you'll hear
Mhm.
us talk about that with like definitely child welfare oriented things. We don't want AI making any kind of punitive decisions in any way without human involvement. But there are other things as well, eligibility determinations. We always talk about AI should support, the people who are doing the work, and especially social services. It's not always cut and dry. Sometimes are, a lot of extenuating circumstances. So human in the loop from a business function, we talk about a lot, but human in the loop on an IT side is also
That's
important,
right.
especially as we're thinking about things like data sharing and collaboration, because how you manage your data within your organization is probably different than some of your sister agencies or your provider organizations. And so uh, at least for a long time, I think, we people are still worried about AI taking their jobs, but I think we have quite a while before we need to worry about things being to that level of automation in government.
Well,
Um,
and not only that, but as we know, regulations and laws change,
yep.
every year, sometimes multiple times during the year. The federal guidance comes out, and you can no longer share, whatever it is with a non-human services agency, or education has some restriction on sharing school data. And so that's always changing. I mean, every bill that passes, whether it's state or federal, potentially would affect how you operationalize data within your system. So
Yeah.
yes,
And the automation of that. I mean, like even thing in HIPAA, FERPA, great, points. But there are even regulatory requirements relative to things like pre-populated data fields. In child
yeah,
welfare, for example, you can't pre-populate certain fields. They want a human to make determinations for certain things. It's also true, another area of concern, certainly under the current administration, is any kind of presumptive eligibility. So just because it says something over here doesn't mean I'm going to presume that you're eligible in this other program. So those kinds of things that lend themselves to automation, because we have the data, we can't just assume that we can or should be able to do that. We must be very, very aware of current regs around all of those sort of things.
exactly. Yep. Well,
Yeah.
and using AI, I think too, as a matter of checks and balances.
Mhm.
Whereas, today or yesterday, somebody had to compare this printed out spreadsheet against this one to see if, make sure that, it all matches. You can, you can write a query now that will do that for you
Yeah.
and tell you where the outliers are. So something as simple as just having AI check AI is something that you could automate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, everybody knows I get excited about AI. I talk about it all the time. I use it all the time. I think there's so many opportunities, but we do have to be a little bit cautious of sort of this shiny new object syndrome, right? We don't want to use it anywhere and everywhere. We want to be smart about where we're using it, how we're applying it, not just from a compliance and regulation perspective, but also what makes sense, right? Sometimes we're going to do some things that are sort of low hanging fruit, because we're maturing the model, as we talked about at the beginning of this call, to try it out in a low risk way. But then once we get a little bit more advanced in our practice and our understanding of the technology, we're going to want to apply that to more in-depth things where we're going to get a bigger ROI. And as we do that, we have to manage risk along the way with that.
And I think, I think this whole AI, movement reinforces the need for states to be talking to other states or national entities that are aware of what all the states are doing to sort of leverage best practices.
Mhm.
Again, every program, every department, every state works in their own little vacuum.
Yeah.
If you're in the SNAP program in Tennessee, that's your world. If you're human services in Tennessee, that's your world. If you're Tennessee, that's your world. And
Right.
there are other human services departments, there are other SNAP programs, there are other states that are dealing with all the same stuff you are. So I do think that, boy, especially with AI, and the investment it takes to make it work right, don't run the risk of stubbing your toe if you don't have to. And maybe somebody else has already learned that lesson,
Mhm.
and there's a best practice that will keep you from doing things the hard way. And
Yeah.
I think that's just the nature of state and local government is you just your head's down and you're in a vacuum. But if you've got somebody on your team that's capable or has a bandwidth to talk to other national consultants, state agencies, national organizations, to sort of ask the question, has anybody else tried to automate X?
Hmm.
I think you could save yourself a lot of time and money.
Yeah. And there are a lot of forums for those conversations too. I mean, in my experience, if a state leader picks up the phone and calls another state leader, they're always happy to take the call, happy to help each other. But we're in the midst of conference season right now, and I'm seeing some great content at a lot of these conferences. So if you can make it to one of those, I'd strongly encourage that. And ISM is the big one in our industry, that's coming up in September. So I looked at the agenda just this morning on that, and there's quite a lot of AI topics there, and some awards being given out for AI work nationally. So there's some, as you said, somebody's been there, somebody's done it. So start talking to other organizations. The other thing, like relative to talking to people, is this the data sharing stuff and MOUs. And, every time you hear a state talk about, oh gosh, we got to go do MOUs and how hard that is. Did you have to do that at any point, when you were in Tennessee?
We did, and it's burdensome, but it's a necessary evil. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's like the best advice on MOUs is start the conversation early, right? Don't push that to the end. Start the conversation now. Almost always there's some mutual benefit for both organizations to share the data. If you can start with some kind of shared goals, that usually helps the conversation. And I always tell agencies, figure out what you want and why you want to use it before you bring the lawyers to the table. Sorry, lawyers. Um, but you have to kind of begin with yes, right? And lawyers, their job is to protect the agency, and so they're coming at it at no, and they're not going to give you full blown access to everything. No one would agree to that. But if you kind of come together, identify your use cases, what data you need, why you need it, how often you need it, it's going to make that conversation with the legal team go a whole lot easier. And then the other thing is, don't reinvent the wheel. There's so much information that has been published by ACF and CMS around MOUs, templates, and data sharing agreements, and all kinds of things that you can leverage. ACF, I mean, it's been a little while now since they published this originally, but they actually had a data sharing toolkit that I thought was quite good at the time. And so, start there. Start with the feds. They're the ones that oversee this stuff nationally, and your federal analysts should be able to even give you some recommendations on people that have done it most recently.
Hey,
So again, yeah,
I know you had wanted to include the link from that Code for America article.
yeah.
Maybe we could include the link for the data sharing toolkit as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. We could
I think
absolutely do that.
I think
Yeah,
that's a good sort of marriage
yeah.
of those two. Yeah.
Yeah, don't start from scratch. People like Tony said earlier, somebody's been there and done it. So, leverage their experience to, accelerate it, because, sometimes I hear people that are like, "Oh, it took us 2 years just to agree on 10 fields to share." So, hopefully that doesn't happen to you, and the process and the templates and that sort of thing should not be what slows you down, because it's been done before. So yeah, we'll provide that. There's other industry resources out there too, and maybe we can provide some of those. I think NIST has AI specific things, right? So some of that's definitely more new. NASIO has put out some playbooks, and then NIST has a risk management framework, or type thing. So we'll put together a list of some of those resources and share them, so that it can help you, because that's what we want to see, people leveraging modern technology to improve their programs. And if these sort of resources can help jumpstart that, we're all for it.
Yeah, and I think this reinforces a point I've made previously about leveraging some of these national groups that you probably have a membership in,
Mm-hmm.
that you're paying a subscription for year over year. And other than going to their annual conference, you really don't leverage
Right.
APHSA or NASIO or, NASBO or anybody like that. So I do think it's a good idea to start leveraging some of those national subscriptions you're paying for, and sort of put feelers out before you spend a lot of time and energy, in a lift like this, to make sure that, like you said, they may have a toolkit, a template, an outline for sort of how to go about this. That'll save you a lot of time and stress, just because
Mm-hmm.
you're not, trying to invent it yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate for, and I didn't do this a lot when I was in that role, but now that I've left, I wish that I had leveraged some of those national organizations more than I did.
Yeah. And I'll give us a little plug too, Tony. I mean, this is all still new, and you might need some outside help to help advise you. And there are people like Tony and I out here who we work with states and help give them really objective third party advice. We're not selling products, um, but I will say we work with a lot of tech vendors in this space, and so we know the products that are out there and the people that are doing really great work in this area. Many vendors in this space have heavily invested in AI and continue to do so. And so, if you already have a vendor in house too, ask them what they're doing to invest in AI. Let them show you their solutions, because, that's R&D money that they're putting into this because they know it's the next big wave. And, I remember, when I was out doing consulting work, many of our state government clients always said, "We expect you to be bringing innovation to us. You have a 5-year contract, M&O, systems integrator. Yeah, they should be bringing that to you." So ask them what they're doing and let them kind of, give you some of the previews on some of that, or maybe you can work with them and be their guinea pig to some degree on some of this, and benefit from this early adoption of these solutions. So I would encourage that, but you can't go wrong with an independent, objective advisor who's going to help you figure out how to take these first steps and develop that practice in your organization.
Yeah, I would agree with that if you like your vendor.
Yeah,
If you don't, then ask their competitor what they do for AI. Because
that's
not
great
not
advice.
everybody likes their vendor, but they're stuck with them for another 3 or 4 years.
True.
So yeah,
That's
so if
true.
you like your vendor, ask them. If you don't, ask their competition.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, as usual, our time flew by today, Tony. But I know you and I are both excited about AI, and we just want folks to leverage it safely. And I also think, like, just in terms of the current administration, people are like kind of pause. They're not sure what to do, if they should do anything. Maybe there's no new money coming. But since there's no new money coming, you probably need to be thinking about how you're spending your money in a very different way and how you're doing your work in a very different way. And AI can certainly help you with that. So I hope you walk away from this call today, um, seeing opportunity, knowing that there's some homework, foundational work that needs to be done in terms of your data, but also excited about the opportunities. But Tony, what kind of takeaways would you like to leave our audience with today?
I guess the biggest takeaway would just be that it doesn't have to be, like you said, a giant project. It can just be a matter of, we want a chat bot that can help reduce our call wait times, right, or responsiveness, and it starts with your data. And we've talked about this on other podcasts where the value, the effectiveness of AI is only as good as the data that feeds it. And so the sooner you start getting into that routine where you've always got clean data, the less of a lift it'll be to leverage AI.
Right. No, good stuff, Tony. Thanks for sharing that. And as always, thanks for hanging out with me today. Thank you to our audience who tunes in to listen to these sessions. If you have topics you want us to cover, we would love to hear what they are. I mean, we're monitoring the landscape all the time and trying to come up with what we think is interesting content for you. But we would love to hear from you, and certainly follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn. And we now have a Vision to Value page on LinkedIn itself. So those updates will come from Vision to Value, as well as my company, Evolve Strategy Group. And as I mentioned, if you're looking for some advisory support, to figure out how to take that leap into AI, Tony and I would love to help you. So do please feel free to email us or reach out through a private message on any of the social channels we're on. And we would love to see you in a future episode of our podcast, Vision to Value. Thank you.